The next speaker is Laura Chasmer from Lethbridge University. Lethbridge is also home to Chris Hopkinson, who was originally invited to join also, but unfortunately couldn't make it. Laura happily could make it. So Laura's going to talk about getting biomass. She's going to talk about multispectral LiDAR and some wetland and water mapping.
Thank you. Okay, good morning. It's very nice to be here, away from very hot Alberta right now into kind of a much cooler climate. Today I'm going to talk about a bit about water and a bit about biomass and a bit about vegetation. Our lab does both. Chris apologizes for not being here. He's been quite busy setting up field experiments and sites for the summer and getting his graduate students organized, so I decided to come instead. I don't know if you know too much about Chris, but both Chris and I have been involved with airborne LiDAR and terrestrial LiDAR operations for about 15 years now. We tested out the first Optech terrestrial laser scanner in a forest environment in 2002. And since then, we've actually had a system in-house, in-lab, and I think we're the only academic group in Canada who's had one. Unfortunately, we lost that system in 2011 because Chris switched positions, the University of Lethbridge, but we're hoping to put in a CFI to acquire a new multispectral LiDAR for that university, which would be research-based, and it would, anybody would have access to it. Anyway, this is our ARTeMiS Lab. It's our laser scanning remote sensing lab at the University of Lethbridge. I just wanted to introduce some of the topics that we look at. We don't only work with LiDAR systems. We're also developing what's called LiDAR, and it's out of a company in Quebec City called LiDAR Tech, which is basically a flash LED LiDAR. Very inexpensive, and so we're starting to get into that for water monitoring. We work with radar, optical imagery, thermal, and various in situ instrumentation. So we're basically very much involved in data fusion methodologies. Here's some of the forest-related activities that we've been working on for the last 3 or so years since being at the University of Lethbridge. I'm going to talk about 3 of those activities. Touch a little bit on multispectral LiDAR that Ahmed talked about just now, and Benoit is going to actually talk more about. So I'm not going to touch that topic too much, but just look into that a little bit, the York Regional Forest. Talk a little bit about biomass. This is an ongoing study that we've been working on using multi-temporal LiDAR. So basically LiDAR collected over multiple periods over the last 10 to 15 years at several different sites. Here, and finally, large area wetland mapping and data fusion, because this is of interest for forestry, especially when you want to create those buffers around those wetland areas. So very interesting both for forestry and also for wetland management and reclamation in Alberta. I would also like to mention the forest fire fuel mapping. We've been working on that since 2011, and the reason for that was because we had a whole bunch of eddy covariance and energy balance towers set up near Lesser Slave Lake, and most of them burned down. So our research switched to, instead of monitoring ecosystems, we were monitoring ecosystems after fire. And I just found out this morning that we also have sites near Fort McMurray. Those ones also burned down. So I think maybe we'll be switching topics. Here's some of the water-related research that we're working on right now as well. So Chris is a hydrologist. He's very, very interested in water movement, flow through of groundwater. He's also very interested in glaciology and snow. He's a glaciologist by training. So we continue to work on our water-based research. The goal of the entire group is to create an integrated framework for addressing a range of ecosystem problems at a range of different scales using data fusion methodologies and integrating with field work. Okay, so I'm going to start first with a bit on the multispectral LiDAR, species classification, leaf area index, and biomass. We really started with species because it was one of the things that we could identify right away from the LiDAR system. And I know Benoit's going to talk more about that, so I'm not going to touch on it too much. But I wanted to just show you this diagram. This is a typical optical waveform of electromagnetic energy that you would get from an optical system, such as like a hyperspectral system, such as a CASI. You've got discrete bands in there that are collected using systems or satellite systems like Landsat, AVHRR, or SPOT. We can also identify 3 small, very discrete bands that we can acquire using laser scanning. So the 1064 nanometer is a popular wavelength that has always been or often used with airborne laser scanners because it is inexpensive relatively to acquire. It's stable over different wavelengths and it's safe for your eyes. Now, there's a further near-infrared or mid-infrared band which has also been incorporated into this new multispectral or Titan optech system. And this is popular for eye safety and power capability. And then finally, we've got the 532 band, which is used for water depth. So this system, as Ahmed showed, is a fully integrated topographical and bathymetric system. So from a land surface monitoring point of view, it just covers all the bases, which is absolutely great. There's a real clear opportunity to look at the response of each band and to be able to better characterize what the land surface without the need for additional data like aerial photography and high-resolution satellite imagery. Okay, so just if we look at some of the species I'll back up a little bit. We've been working at a forest just north of Toronto called the York Regional Forest. We've been surveying this forest in collaboration with Optech, but also with our own system since 1999. So we have about, I think it must be about 10 LiDAR data sets for this forest, the most recent one being a multispectral LiDAR data set. But I wanted to point out here, you can see these are our different land cover types within this kind of broad area here. And we can actually see very distinct signature separability between the 3 different wavelengths here for the different classes. So based on that signature separability, we can take that information and we can start to classify the land surface as Ahmed showed. And we can also start to look at the differences between species and presumably ecosystem health. Now, here is, this is what the kind of just an intensity image, each intensity band from the 3 lasers is put into a different wavelength, so red, green, and blue, and you see this kind of image. And we can really identify some of the different forest species types just visually. These are hardwoods here. These are mostly white pine, softwood stands, and we've got some tamarack up here. We can also identify differences in soil type and structure, some of the crops. So it's really a very useful tool that can give you a lot of information. If we apply just a very easy classification, a maximum likelihood classification, very simple, we can classify the basic species that are found in this forest and the mixture of them, and with quite high accuracy. I think we're getting about somewhere around 90% accuracy. So we get improved 3-dimensional sampling with this system. We also get improved classification. And from there, we can start to do other things with it, like derive an active NDVI map. So here you have This is NDVI from ALS. That's 1 meter active. You've got a whole lot of variability in there in the NDVI. This is an NDVI image from SPOT, 5 meter passive. It looks quite different. So we can get down to tree level information in NDVI. Okay, so I'm going to move on to another topic. This is some of our biomass research, and we're basically taking biomass at the plot and tree level, the tree and plot level, scaling it up to the stand and actually incorporate it with spaceborne LiDAR, so like using the glass system. So we can use all this information, we can put it together within a model and create kind of a transfer model over a very broad area. So a lot of this work is based on multi-temporal LiDAR data collection. So we can calculate biomass for a single point in time, but what's really interesting is to actually see the growth or the change in vegetation as it kind of grows up and grows out over time. So this just is a schematic diagram of the net ecosystem productivity or net ecosystem exchange of a forest, and the different kind of biomass layers that you find within a forest. I'm not going to go into that in too much detail, but over time, what we can see is there's a kind of a partitioning of carbon within different components of the tree. Some of the carbon is used for growth, some of it goes back out into the ecosystem for respiration. So what we're interested in doing is taking what we know from instruments, expensive instruments like eddy covariance, which kind of provide a point measure in time, to something like LiDAR, so it gives you the actual amount of biomass growth over that time. But before I talk a little bit about that, I was talking with Richard Fournier a little bit about flying LiDAR at wide scan angles, and I just kind of I dug into some of our old LiDAR presentations, and I found some old slides on sampling geometry for change detection, and I just wanted to mention this. This is a terrestrial laser scan. It's hard to see, but this is a eucalypt forest in Australia that Chris worked on with CSIRO, and this is what the aerial LiDAR data looks like for that forest, and then you can see the terrestrial laser scans within the airborne system. So we're missing quite a lot of the airborne information of the forest structure with the airborne, but we're also missing quite a lot in the terrestrial laser scans. Now, if we look at things using different scan angles or different sensors, I'm sure you know that it's over time as the lasers actually start to degrade. So what happens is that when they degrade, you basically require more biomass to elicit a return. So we have to take that into account whenever we're doing any height or growth measurements, how much the laser has degraded over time. So this is, again, the Hemi scan from the TLS. This is high-resolution ALS, and for Richard Fournier, this is a 30-degree scan angle. Absolutely beautiful data set. You've got to make sure you've got your 50% overlap of scan lines, so you're hitting both sides of the tree. We're getting 10 pulses per meter squared. Now, if we look at an older LiDAR system that was flown of this forest at the same time, approximately 2 pulses per meter squared, 18-degree scan angle, we can see quite a lot of difference in the structure. I don't know if that's affecting the height, but there's a lot of difference in the structure. So, talk a little bit about biomass growth. This is a jack pine chronosequence that we've been working on at the BERM sites, which is a FluxNet Canadian Carbon Program set of sites in Saskatchewan. We've been looking at the growth since 2005, so we've done, I think, three LiDAR surveys over this site. You can see just relatively, this is the change in growth. You can see parts of the canopy that are more productive than other parts of these canopies. This is the oldest stand here. This is the youngest. These have been harvested in 1975, harvested in 1994, harvested in 2002. And you can also see quite a lot of mortality as well. So with the change data, we can see a lot of information. We can use LiDAR using an interquartile range metric to actually calculate the total live carbon here based on our allometry and our field plot. So here we've got total live carbon over time, and then this is the biomass increase. These things here, these little bullseyes, those are the flux tower sites. Now what we can do with that is we can take our airborne LiDAR and we can actually scale up to something like a satellite LiDAR, and we can train that. We can use that to train Landsat. So one of Chris's postdocs, Craig Mahoney, was able to use a random forest methodology to calculate canopy height, gap fraction, crown closure, and biomass within the Northwest Territories in northern Alberta. And this is critical for mapping forest attributes in northern environments. So this is a very large area of the lower southern part of the Northwest Territories. This is stand height using random forest, and then this is crown closure. We also get an estimate of uncertainty. Now, I'm going to skip the wetland mapping and just kind of go straight to the conclusion. We used LiDAR for wetland mapping, and it was extremely accurate. Anyway, I just want to skip through these. Some of our ongoing and future initiatives, we have a partnership with Teledyne Optech and NRCan and the Government of Alberta to monitor or to evaluate the multispectral LiDAR classification and monitoring system over parts of Alberta for 2 weeks this summer. We're going to look more at carbon partitioning, so improving above and below ground carbon and biomass assessment. Woody to leafy biomass separation using ALS and TLS data fusion. We're also working with SAR LiDAR fusion for improved ecosystem wetland monitoring. And as I mentioned, we've got a CFI that's moving forward to proposal stage to build a national LiDAR research center with airborne multispectral LiDAR survey capability. So this would be a system that is a research-based system. It could be used and accessed by anyone across Canada. It will also have 2 waveform digitizers associated with 2 of the lasers and a thermal camera. And that's it for me. Thank you.